Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, April 4th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about Sarah Palin, the vice presidential nominee for the 2008 presidential election. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the bid that she has now announced for Congress in the state of Alaska following Representative Don Young's unfortunate passing. He died at 88, actually serving in the state of Alaska since 1973 from a special election that he filled. Now with this happening, the seat is now up for the 2022 midterm elections. Now, there isn't going to be a special election ahead of 2022. It's merely going to coincide with the regularly scheduled election. And following Representative Don Young's passing, there are a number of candidates that have now entered into the political arena in the state of Alaska. None more notable than former vice presidential candidate and Alaska Governor Sarah Palin. Now, when you immediately get to her website, it is very evident that her website is dated. It is not something that was geared up and prepared for this bid. She had entertained it in the past, talking about a possibility of running for statewide office. Some anticipated that she might run for Senate or governor, but never for House because Don Young has been in office for such a substantial period of time. But instead, now Sarah Palin is focusing her efforts on the congressional race, and she's doing so with some heavy levels of support. Immediately following her announcement, Donald Trump announces that he endorses Sarah Palin for Alaska's lone congressional seat. Consequently, the entirety of the Republican and Democratic primaries of sorts, which we'll talk about in just a moment because there aren't actually any primaries, have essentially been completely decided. Donald Trump endorsing Sarah Palin pretty much puts her in frontrunner status, and it makes it very difficult for any type of Republican and even a Democrat from defeating Sarah Palin come this November in the Alaska congressional race. Looking at Sarah Palin's history, again, I told you she was the vice presidential nominee for John McCain in 2008, and we can actually see how that presidential election went. In 2008, the Democratic Party obliterated the Republican Party, winning 365 electoral votes, coming within single digits of states such as North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Missouri, right? You're talking about South Carolina that came down close, Georgia. These were states that were decided by single digits because Barack Obama was a dominating figure, and Sarah Palin and John McCain were seemingly weak Republicans. The state of Alaska, however, overwhelmingly went to John McCain, and then 4 years later ended up narrowing down significantly, and then in 2020 ended up narrowing down about 4 points relative to Mitt Romney's victory back in 2012. So, in the state of Alaska, Sarah Palin actually benefited the Republican Party by a pretty significant amount. If you take a look at 2004, Bush might have won it more than in 2008, but keep in mind, in 2004, that was a red victory. 286 electoral votes, Republicans were winning all across the nation. But in 2008, the Democrats absolutely dominated, and many states that were previously safe Republicans, such as North and South Dakota, became much, much closer for Barack Obama and John McCain. But Alaska really didn't budge. And if you take a look at Sarah Palin's public image amongst voters in the state of Alaska, the last approval rating poll from, granted, over a decade ago, but still one of our last bits of data when it comes down to the public image of Sarah Palin, she was at 56% in terms of the approval rating, and at one point was at a high of 93%. Now, that is unrealistic for today's standard. If you're taking a look at the way that the public now views Democrats and Republicans, it becomes very difficult to see any type of significant bipartisan support or approval for one candidate. But one thing I want you to take away from this is that Sarah Palin finalizing her term in office as the governor ended up being approved of by a pretty significant amount. In addition to that, the lieutenant governor, Sean Parnell, went on to win in 2014, but then lost. Went on to win in 2010, but then lost in 2014. But the interesting thing about this is that Sarah Palin, while someone who didn't necessarily think was an electoral juggernaut, actually did very well considering the national environment that she won her governor election in. It was a blue wave year. Democrats were winning the majority in terms of the overall governor delegations. Democrats were winning in Iowa, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Kansas, but could not crack the state of Alaska. And when you take a look at the margin there, it wasn't something necessarily super impressive, but to end up a year later with a 93% approval definitely is telling you something. Sarah Palin won by about 8 points statewide, 7 points in 2006. Again, 2006 was a blue wave year. Democrats flipped control of the House, flipped control of the Senate, in addition to winning the majority of governorships in the state. Ultimately, what we find from the state of Alaska is that the Republican Party probably should not have performed as well as they did with Sarah Palin, but ultimately they ended up winning. Now, fast forward to 2022, what we can expect is that there isn't going to be a super competitive election in the state of Alaska. The governor election doesn't look like it's in a position where we're really going to see too much depending on, who ends up running. There is a strong independent candidate, the former governor here. Let's see if we can actually find him. Bill Walker, who won in 2014, but then ended up having to drop out in 2018 because there was no consolidated effort to re-elect him as governor. We will see what happens in this position, but looking at the House election, it could be interestingly competitive. The House election in the state of Alaska hasn't always been, how would I put this, competitive. The House election in Alaska has almost always gone to the GOP. Now, more recently, it has gotten closer, but since the beginning of his term, 1973, we saw that Alaska was almost always consistently red. In fact, Don Young has been the representative without fail in every single election, despite national environment changing. Even 2006, he won by 17. 2008, he won by 5. 2010, he won by 39. 2012, he wins by 35. 2014, he wins by 10. It really just depends on the national environment, but one thing is clear, that Alaska is red. Now, it did get closer in 2020. He ended up winning by single digits for the first time in quite some time, I think, since 2008. And it was a 9.1% victory, meaning that he underperformed Donald Trump, which is quite surprising to see. But now that you see that Donald Trump has actually performed a bit better in the state of Alaska, you might understand that this endorsement actually could do some significant damage to other Republicans and also many other Democrats. Alaska, at the end of the day, is still very much a red state. Donald Trump won by double digits, and it's a state that hasn't gone to the Democratic Party on the presidential level in over 50 years. So to expect it to suddenly change in favor of the Democratic Party because Sarah Palin is running is to be naive and completely ignore reality. Sarah Palin very well could become the next representative from the state of Alaska without any type of major opposition. Though Dr. Al Gross is deciding to run as an independent, there is some possibility that he ends up getting into quarrels with Democrats and they start attacking him, and thus Democrats choose not to rank them, choose not to rank independents, choose not to rank Dr. Al Gross, whereas, he might not be able to win over anyone that's willing to cross party lines because he's too independent, or he's too right-wing for some, too left-wing for others. That's the risk you run being an independent and not affiliating with an individual political party. Al Gross was endorsed by the Democrats back in 2020, ended up losing the Senate race to Dan Sullivan by, get this, actually a larger margin than what we saw between Donald Trump and Joe Biden in the state, which meant that Alaska on the Senate level was actually never going to be super competitive, and that Republicans did not necessarily significantly, but still did better than the Democratic Party, than the Republicans did on the presidential level. So altogether, what I think we should understand is that Sarah Palin comes out ahead no matter how you cut the cake. You take a look at this and you say, okay, her 2006 numbers and her 2008 and 2009 polling numbers tell us that she is still a popular figure. That very well could have changed, but the public approval of someone who doesn't necessarily frequent top headlines in Alaska politics probably isn't going to change much. Even though she has become a more national figure, you do have to understand, again, Alaska is still a red state. She's going to bat for Donald Trump. She's serving Republicans in, many ways on the national news media, so they might see it actually as a pro for electing her to this statewide office, or national office, but a very much statewide position. If you take a look at the Republican Party, you can actually find that there are a significant amount of candidates running, but no one super significant. You see that there's a businessman, a supply company sales agent. You have the Alaska Policy Forum board member, someone who's a grandson of three Democrats across the state of Alaska. I mean, you're not necessarily finding the most well-known and reputable names on the Republican side, which means, again, that Sarah Palin is going to benefit from this. And Al Gross is running against other Democrats, which does raise the concern about pushing away the Democratic vote should it come down to the eventual runoff system, in which you see that Al Gross ends up faced off against Sarah Palin, or potentially a Democrat against Sarah Palin. Many people who are willing to support an independent aren't necessarily willing to support a Democrat over a Republican. Now, there isn't any polling data because, as of recently, Don Young was expected to easily win this election. 2022 was not going to be similar to 2020 or 2018, so many people expected the Republican Party to easily win, and the ratings sort of tell you that. It's solid Republican, likely Republican. But now we're in a position where we have, surprisingly enough, someone who is still popular, I would argue, across the state of Alaska, but still someone who is, in a sense, vulnerable in the future. I think that 2022 will end up with a Republican victory in Alaska, no matter who ends up being the main Republican frontrunner. Because we now are in a position where we do have this, ranked choice voting type of system, it is very possible for other Democrats and Republicans to remain in the race till November and not choose to drop out, saying that, there's still a chance for them, that ranked choice voting could carry them across the finish line, that it could provide them to be in a position where they end up one-on-one against the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate. But generally speaking, we know the top two contenders here are Dr. Al Gross and Governor Sarah Palin. Those are the two main people that I can expect to be the main figureheads for this race, an independent and a Republican. Sarah Palin really has lucked out, in the sense that she did not have an opening for political office at all. And, I don't say that in an effort at all to try to desensitize or take away from the tragedy of Don Young's death, but I do want to say that, when you take a look at American politics and you take a look at Alaska politics, Sarah Palin never really had an opportunity to run. When you take a look at the Senate elections, at the governor elections, no one was willing to give her a political victory. Ever since she decided to not run for re-election for governor and pretty much detract herself from Alaska electoral politics, still very much staying active in the media, being the representative for many people's, ideas of what a 2012 Republican nominee could be or what a Republican woman in office could be. She did not really stay engaged when it came down to elected office, and I think people took note of that. The Republicans in Alaska sort of wrote her off as someone who was a shining star at one point, but was never going to return to Alaska politics. Well, now we know that simply is not the case. And with the endorsement of President Trump, I do truly think that benefits her a significant amount. You are going to find Republicans here that now see Sarah Palin as their only option because of Donald Trump's endorsement. They might have been able or potentially considering other Republicans, people that would be able to be, electoral juggernauts or, well-known names across the state. Potentially former governors could have ran, right? Potentially former recognizable names across the state of Alaska could have decided, I'm going to throw my hat into the ring because voters know who I am. Everyone knows Sarah Palin in the state of Alaska. I'm sure a significant portion of the nation knows who Sarah Palin is. And I think now that she's running, she has very much prevented many other nominees or potential nominees from running, in addition to the fact that she has secured the most coveted endorsement for any Republican contender in any congressional race from President Donald Trump. In terms of my overall predictions, what I expect to happen is that many people end up dropping out of the race following this announcement from President Trump. It was broken yesterday in the Washington Post at 9:58 p.m. Eastern Time, which means we're less than 24 hours from the time that Donald Trump endorsed Sarah Palin and now, which means that a significant amount of people are probably looking at this and considering, hey, what are my next steps as someone who's looking to run for office? What are my next steps as a Republican who wants a political future? It doesn't necessarily look too good to run against Donald Trump's hand-chosen person, especially in a race that seems to be predetermined when your efforts are likely to be futile. And I think a lot of people are going to come to terms with that, in a sense that there doesn't seem to be a place for them in Alaska politics right now, especially with Sarah Palin's bid and the fact that Donald Trump has endorsed her for this nomination process. And considering the past election results, it looks like, Sarah Palin is very much going to be the next congresswoman from the state of Alaska. The Democrats don't really pose a threat. The Libertarian Party doesn't really pose a threat. Independents, maybe. Al Gross is a potential, possibility. The only drawback, I would say, for Republicans nominating Sarah Palin, or at least, choosing her in the actual election because of this ranked choice voting fiasco, what I think is going to happen is that she wins easily in 2022. But in future elections, she becomes vulnerable. She becomes vulnerable because of her lack of experience. She becomes vulnerable because she has been very willing in many previous situations to really mess up interviews and, press points and, certain things where the spotlight is on her. The focus is on her electoral history, on her governor history, on everything. And now what is going to be potentially a congressional history, things of that nature are going to be really discussed when it comes down to Sarah Palin. And I think in the future, she could truly be the Republican nominee that Democrats actually hope for. While right now they are likely not going to defeat her, I think she could be a contender that could be defeated in the future, 2024, 2026, depending on the national environment and the Alaskan environment. Alaska, surprisingly enough, has actually gotten bluer over the years. When you take a look at the change between now and 2012, or 2016, you'll see Alaska has been 5 points more Democratic. Between 2012, 4 points more Democratic. 2008, 12 points more Democratic. 2004, you're talking 15.5 points more Democratic. 2000, 21 points more Democratic. Year after year after year, relative to now versus previous election years, the state of Alaska has gotten significantly bluer. And it looks like the trend is only going to continue. I think that as we move forward into our next elections, we see Alaska maintain itself as a red state, but it doesn't mean that Democrats don't have an opportunity. The fact that Don Young, as a 40, 50-year incumbent, underperformed Donald Trump across the state of Alaska should probably be a warning sign that, hey, not every Republican nominee is going to easily win this election. Though Don Young did win by about 9 points statewide, that's not necessarily super impressive when you understand him as someone who is very much viewed as an electoral juggernaut in the state of Alaska, especially considering that most Republicans across the nation outperformed Donald Trump between the House level and the presidential level. We will see what happens in 2022, but my bet is on Sarah Palin right now, and I think that's truly where the state of Alaska is directed into. But for future elections, I'm not so sure that she's the strongest or the best GOP nominee that they could run for upcoming elections beyond 2022. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 House of Representatives election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.